hour. It'll be over. It'll be over before we know about it. You got to come up to the mic.
Okay.
Hello, good morning. I'm your guest, Hassan Aleem, and we're in apartheid, Michigan, as always, apartheid, Michigan. Apartheid, not part-time, apartheid, Michigan. And we have a special guest today, Dr. Ietta Lipscomb. And she'll be with us for most of the show. And we have our co-host here.
Co-host Kyle Williams.
And you have a book that you have published or you want to talk about?
Yes, I do. May I? Are we on there?
Yes, we're on the air and you have to
Okay.
talk into the mic.
Yes, my name is Etta Lipson. I am a minister and an attorney, and I experienced in my lifetime and what we're living in today a lot of counseling situations, counseling as an attorney and counseling as a pastor. And a lot of people in our community and in our world are really, really brokenhearted today. And they're brokenhearted because of the things that life has put them through. So, in my own prayer life, I ask God, God, how can I help these people that are coming to me? How can I help them to know that there is help available for them, that they are not in this world alone? And in my spirit, I received the advice, write a book called the book Healing for the Brokenhearted. And the way I decided to develop this book and the story is I looked at what are people coming to me to talk about as a pastor? What are people coming to me to talk about as a lawyer? What is making people cry? And I came to the conclusion that there are 5 areas that seem to be bothering people most. And that is, of course, you're brokenhearted if there's death of a loved one. You know that in our community it is said that 50% of marriages are ending in divorce. People are very brokenhearted when someone that they have pledged before family and friend to love, and now because of life circumstances, people are having to part. So they're brokenhearted over divorce. There are really a lot of people facing financial difficulties. There are a lot of bankruptcies, and even though we're not hearing about foreclosures as much nowadays, foreclosures are running rampant in this community. And people are losing their homes that they have invested in because of lost job and other stresses. But they're brokenhearted because of their financial situation. And as a woman pastor, and if there are any women pastors listening or ministers or clergy women, hopefully you can attest to this. There are women clergy who are very, very broken hearted. They're sad, they're distressed, and they are bruised. And they are so because they know in their own hearts that God has called them into ministry. But when we go before our larger churches and congregations, sometimes we are rejected, and our call is rejected. And therefore, the anointing that God has on our lives sometimes is not felt and seen and heard. women are brokenhearted because of rejection of their call into ministry. Another area is that churches are being sued. Some people are really shocked about that. But churches are being sued because people are desperate for money. And in many of our communities, churches are the only viable institution they see. So they look for, how can I get some money out of this church? So they fake slips and falls. They accuse the pastor and the church of mischief. But it's an area of brokenheartedness for many, many pastors, their boards in the church, that their church is being sued, and many times unjustifiably so. But not only are the people in the church suing the church, but the churches are also businesses. I mean, their roofs leak, they need plumbers, they need repairs to the building, and sometimes there's a contractual violation, and the churches are sued because of that. So there are many pastors today, many clergy people today, who are very sad and heartbroken because of the church being sued. So what I'm here today is to talk about the book that I have written, Healing for the Brokenhearted. And Healing for the Brokenhearted is Christian counseling that will help people to recover in any of the areas that I have given to you as topics. Also, something wonderful happened to me on yesterday. My book is in manuscript form, so like many writers, I had to send the book out to publishers to be published. And yesterday I got the word that a major publisher of Christian literature, which is Faith Christian Publishing, is going to publish my book. And you will be able to find the book in all major bookstores, Barnes and Noble, all over the United States. The book will be on Amazon, Healing for the Brokenhearted. It is also available in EPUB, so you can get it for your iPad, your iPhones, and your Nooks. So God has blessed Healing for the Brokenhearted, and my name again is Etta Lipson, to go forth, because it's not just a book, it is a healing tool. The book puts forth the ministry of Jesus Christ. Let me tell you how important brokenheartedness is. God himself, when he anointed Jesus, said, I am anointing you to preach the gospel to the poor. We know that's important. But the very second thing he said, God said, is, I'm going to anoint you to heal the brokenhearted, to heal those who are wounded, crushed, and bruised in spirit. So the book tells you about the ministry of Jesus, what God has promised that he will do for you through Jesus Christ. So if you are a believer in God, this is what I have to say to you this morning. No more crying, no more sighing. Your victory is in healing that God has already given to you.
Well, that was a long introduction,
Okay.
but hopefully that got to point out that it's quite a big field that you are counseling in. And it's interesting that you brought up a point that the churches are being sued. Is it because the parishioners feel that they got in some bad contracts and unable to pay those mortgages, or what? Some of that's going on. And I would think, I hear people say, well, they belong to this church or they belong to that mosque or that synagogue in different places, and they needed some help on the gas bill, and they wouldn't give them a dime. And I've been going to this church for 30 years or 20 years, and they wouldn't help me. So I guess people do feel kind of rejected or let down or misled when they felt that was their need of help. I asked them, well, did you go to all the places? And they said they went to every place, to get the help. So that's interesting. I guess you hear that kind of stuff all the time, though.
Yes, churches have, in the last few years, taken on major building renovations. And the building renovations have really put many churches in a great deal of debt. One popular church I heard here did a $25 million building renovation that was completed a couple of years ago. It takes people many, many years of giving tithes and offerings in a city like Detroit to pay for a $25 million building. So the question does become in the mind of many parishioners, is that what God intended for our tithes to be used for? The building of buildings. We certainly know without a question that God intends our tithes and offerings to be used for spreading the gospel. But then it becomes a question for church boards, for church pastors, and for church members. How do we best serve our community? In this community, we're talking about Detroit metropolitan area. Does it serve a church well to have $125,000 monthly payment on their mortgage? Is that the best use of the church's money? And we trust that our pastors, our financial boards in our churches, and our deacon boards are making the right decisions. But as parishioners, is that a question for you? How do you feel about that? And as our host said, some people are in need of help with the water bill, help with the leaking roofs in their home, help with keeping heat on in the winter. Should they be able to go to the church to ask for assistance in those things? It's a question. Does the church have a duty to help the poor? Knowing also now, God has told us the poor will always be with us. So churches do have to use prudence in how they are using their funding. But we as a community, I think, are obligated to ask the leaders of our church and our churches, do we have a feeding program that helps the hungry? Do we have a senior assistance program where we can buy a van to help senior citizens get back and forth to the doctor and to pick up medications? I'd like to hear your opinions on how churches and associations can help in our communities.
Okay, we're going to go to the lines in just a few minutes. I found it to be very interesting that over $100,000, $125,000 a month for a note on a church that costs $25 million. I guess that person would be upset if you couldn't help them pay a $200 light bill or a gas bill to keep them from freezing. Wow, those are some strange dynamics that we have gotten into today all across the country with the bling bling and with some of these churches and the ones in Detroit with those $125,000 notes. I wouldn't consider them. Well, I don't know. Maybe those are some bling bling preachers, but pastors. But I didn't consider them to be that flashy. But somehow they got messed around and turned around in putting that kind of money in a building that when the building opened up or when they finished building the building, the roof was leaking. And that's Tabernacle over there on the boulevard in Grand River. And I guess people thought, I don't know what they thought, because who was going to pay for the note on the church? The angels? Now, I would say maybe I should just say I'm pretty cynical about it. And I don't think it's cynical, but when we look at some of these churches and the locations that they're in, like on the boulevard, and that's going to be like the demarcation line for the new city of Detroit. And it's almost like they built the church for the new white folks to come into, because when they fold on the church, if maybe they're going to pray hard enough and somebody's going to bail them out, that's a lot of money now. But if they don't, and if the foreclosures affect the churches, a lot of people will get a pretty good brand new church at half the price. Isn't that what happens in the foreclosure? And I don't know, why wouldn't they going by, people don't know, especially in the Baptist church, that they have laws to go by, not, in the state of Michigan, the economic, what do they call it, not economical, what is that the word? Anyway, they have religious statutes or they have state laws that are applied to churches. Like people don't know, ecclesiastic, that's it. The ecclesiastic laws in the state of Michigan. They cannot put you out of a church because you refuse to give them any money. Now that's very interesting. When I found that out, I said, well, wow, let me walk. That's another story, though. Oh, you mean you can't put me out if I don't tithe, brother? Well, people don't know that, but that's the law. That is the law in the state of Michigan, and a lot of people don't know it, and they have, I call them loose boards, but they do have a board of directors that we usually call the deacon board. And actually the trustee board would have more authority, because in the law it's the board of trustees and the deacon board isn't in the law. But they don't know that. The deacons don't know who has the authority, but they think they got the most authority. Let's take some calls. We have some callers that have been waiting a while, and thanks for holding, caller.
Good morning, Hassan.
Good morning.
You made me laugh when you said, who's going to pay for those mortgages? The angels? that was really funny to me, and it just reminds me, too, that these churches are agents of the government. They're nonprofits, and they're really foreign to the original African spirituality concepts and practices. They are nothing but European practices that dumb down people, and especially black folks. And it's no wonder that these warped minds would dare go into a $25 million mortgage to build a building that they can't afford. This spirituality, this Christianity, all that crap has created a bunch of imbeciles. and they are responsible for the downfall of Africans in America. And they went over and poisoned Africans too. Africans, Christians, influenced by mostly white missionaries, are now killing Africans who still practice their indigenous religions because they won't come over to Christianity. So, again, I just want to say these religions, Islam and Christianity, they need to be thrown out of our community so we can get back to the core of our spirituality, which is common sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you may.
Well, I would like to address the caller. Number one, as a pastor and a believer in church, the foundation of the church is not the pastors of the church nor the church board. As a Christian, I believe the foundation of the church is laid upon Jesus Christ and what God has done. And that it starts with whether you believe God is the creator. And if you do, then that gives you a biblical worldview. So we're not saying anything about the Bible. We're talking about religion. And when you say religion, that is not Christianity and that is not necessarily Islam. But the Bible itself, and one of the things I talk about in my book, is having financial wisdom. All wisdom is in God. And men go through and search out that wisdom. And we as individuals may not like what someone else deems to be wisdom. They certainly may not agree with us in terms of what we believe to be wisdom. But I think you have to look for a foundation of where your wisdom is coming from. Are you going to be one who goes with the wisdom of the world, which is a source of wisdom? Or are you going to be one who goes with a biblical worldview and use the scriptures and the Bible as your foundation for wisdom? There's a lot that the church can do to help people. And one of the things I profess right now is that we need the people in our communities, those who really do believe that God is a source of strength and courage, to lift up that spiritual side of our lives, not just looking at what men are doing, but looking at, can this be better if I look at what God says he can do? And what God says he can do is a whole lot more than what the church is doing right now. So we don't want to limit God, the Spirit, and as Hussein said, the angels, to just what we see churches doing today, because churches are led by men. And the answer is, if you don't like what churches are doing, find one that you do agree with and help them to be on the right path, the path that you think is the right path.
Well, one of the things I would think, if more people were aware, had more business knowledge, more sense about business. But I guess we say more dollars than the 2 cents that we have about business, because they coming around again telling people, oh, you can get these low mortgages, and they did the churches the same way. But that effect on those neighborhoods are that people that were going to the churches stopped going because it was just not financially feasible for them to keep donating that type of money, whatever they set for them to donate, to pay off $100,000 a month. And that's really crazy. I don't know how is it that you go to I wasn't there, but we heard it through the grapevine. I was with a group, I say a committee, the former, what was it called, the Detroit,
Greater Charter Committee.
the Greater Detroit Charter Committee, and one of the members of the committee was a member of, I think she's still a member of Tabernacle, and the whole thing, she would come and ask us about the construction costs, and she was on the construction committee down there. And when she was telling us $100,000 a month, I say, they got to be crazy. So people knew it was $100,000 a month, and people disagreed with the pastors or the minister of the church, but for some reason, they have a sway over a lot of members of the church. And they had heavyweights going to that church. I mean, he still might be down there. Congressman John Conyers goes down there. And other folks. The judge, Damon Keith. Because she was naming the people that were there that were just more or less going along with it, wasn't paying that much attention. But when the stuff hit the fan, they stopped coming around as much. And I said, well, they wasn't there. I mean, he was the congressman. He wasn't there making no decisions every day. He was doing like everybody else, looking at the report. But then nobody stopped to say, how much does a $15 million church cost? Where are we going to get the money? We're going to hit the lucky lottery number. They really got to pull a couple of rabbits out the hat for that one, don't you?
Well,
Go
oh,
ahead. Go ahead.
well, I will say on that regard that I have been on a number of church boards with the Southern Baptist Convention, the Southern Baptist Convention. I was on their executive board for 9 years. Churches make a lot of money. The Southern Baptist Tennessee Baptist Tennessee Baptist Association had a $750 million budget. Churches make a lot of money. People do believe in tithing.
Okay, well, how did they make money? Just tell us how they make money, because it's not enough people around here that's going to give enough money to come up with this $7 million budget. So
That is not true. That's absolutely not true.
Is that right?
That's churches make a lot of money. $100,000 a month for a church that is the size of Tabernacle is not extraordinary. I mean, for when we're thinking from our own minds, like I go to work and make $50,000 a year, 125,000 seems like an astronomical number, but it really isn't. A really big church might make 25 million a year, so 125 is not. And it depends on a lot of other things. And before we get too far astray, I hope the last caller is still listening.
oh yeah,
Because one of the things that you said, you were incorrect on when you said that churches are agents of the government. They are not. There is still a separation of church and state. And becoming a 501c3 doesn't make a church an agent of the government. It does, in fact, just the opposite. It keeps the government from becoming involved in church business. The IRS cannot come in and audit a church because there is a separation of church and state. So if you are a church, all churches are considered to be 501c3s, whether you have formally filed it or not. And that's because of keeping the government out of the church's business. If when you're suing a church, one of the biggest issues is that the judges don't have authority because the law has to address specifically. Judges can't just make up things as they go. There has to be a law that applies to your specific situation if it is a church. So if there is a law that the judge can apply, then the judge can intervene in a church situation. If there is no law giving that judge the right, Judges usually will choose to stay out of the matter. So there is still separation of church and states. Churches are free to operate as they choose, but since churches cannot be taxed, which is one of the benefits of being a nonprofit corporation, the government doesn't have a free reign in the church at all.
Well, he did say it was an agent of the church. But now, wasn't that George Bush a few years ago that said they were going to get rid of a lot of the nonprofit uh, status of churches?
Yes, and they were unsuccessful in doing so. They went after the big churches like Creflo Dollar, Joyce Meyer, some of the really big and well-known ministries, Joel Osteen's. Every single church survived the audits and are still standing. And because the churches were so strong in their position, I've forgotten the name of the senator who tried to put that forward, but that's no longer moving forward. The Constitution of the United States gives you the right to have a separation of church and state. So, in order to do away with that, you have to change the Constitution, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do.
You know, it's one thing that I see as far as the churches is concerned is that the churches used to be community orientated. And usually when you had a church years ago, that church would be in the community. Now most of the churches, even though they are in the community, the people coming from other communities and people that are around the community, most of the time their members are not within the community. And it seems like when they start, the more that they start doing that, seems like the less, I would say, benefit or things that I see that the churches did. But when they were community orientated, it seemed like it was more done. I could put it that way.
Well, I will say to that, one of the things that is a pet peeve of mine is that the government has taken over a lot of the roles that the church used to have. For example, the feeding programs were all in the church at one time. If you needed clothing, you went to the church for it. Now, when people need help with food, they go to the government for a government program. If they need help with the electric or the water bill, they look to see if the state or the county or the government has some kind of program. So as the government stepped up to provide services to families, the churches were like, "Phew, I'm glad," and they let the government have those programs. But we can never talk in 100% certainties because there are a lot of churches that are doing an incredible work with helping seniors, helping kids, helping to provide food programs and clothing programs and back to school programs. So they are doing a lot. And in order to be fair, we would have to document the good things that the churches are doing. But I do say again, Carl, that when the government stepped up to take over some of the social services roles, it diminished some of the things that the churches did and are doing.
Well, there's a lot of churches giving out food every week,
Yes?
Yeah.
every day of the week. I mean, if a person didn't have it, all they had to do was find out what churches gave it out on Tuesday, which one Monday and Wednesday. They could get a wagon or a buggy and walk around and feed their family. There's a plenty church giveaway. There's a lot of clothes. There's a lot of things the churches are doing that they don't get credit for, and maybe they should step up and talk about it. But this $25 million budget a year, a church in the city of Detroit in a black neighborhood, which one or which two or three are they that
Well,
gets that kind of money?
you have to look to your larger churches. People believe in tithing, and they believe in tithing because it's scriptural. And
But
What God promises that when you tithe, that He will, and this is God Himself talking. He says, if you tithe to the church, if you tithe to my house, I will open a window of heaven. God says, I will open a window of heaven and I will pour you out a blessing that you will not have room enough to receive. So many people tithe and they have received the blessings that come with tithing. God does exactly what He said. Now, if you are poor and struggling and suffering, you might look at, do I tithe? Can I tithe? How could I get closer to tithe? Can I really take God on? God says this in the Bible: test me, put me to the test. You give to the church and watch and see what I will do for you. I will give to you, is what God says. So people know it and they tithe and tithe and tithe. You look at people like Bill Gates and Oprah and other people who we know to be greatly wealthy. Those people not only tied 10%, Bill Gates gave 50% of his money away because he realized the money wasn't his. The money belongs in the earth. And so people set up foundations to give scholarships and to give to sick children and hospitals that are taking care of research on cancer and things like that. So there are many, many people who believe in tithing to the church, and they do tithe to the church. Not to say that there aren't some poor and struggling churches, because of course there are. But remember, the church, God said the church is His house, and God is not poor. And He doesn't intend for His house to be poor, nor for the people who love Him to be poor.
well, let's take a call.
Okay.
Caller, you on the air?
Well, I just say amen to the sister. That was a good sermon. I appreciate it this morning. First of all, I like to know the name of her book.
Healing for the Brokenhearted is the name of the
Healing
book. And my name is
for
Healing for
Broken.
the Brokenhearted. And
Okay.
it will be available at Barnes and Noble, Amazon. It's still at the publisher. They're still doing some last minute things to it,
Uh
but
huh.
they are going to have it available on EPUB as well. So if you like e-published books, it will be there as well.
Now, what's your name?
Etta Lipson. ETTA is my first name. LIPSON is my last name.
Okay. Now, the second thing is that the internet is off. I called in to report that. And I'm glad I did because I'm gonna get your book.
Okay.
And but the internet is off. Half the people that should be listening to this are not hearing it.
Oh.
I agree with you. People don't realize that I was talking to Jim Holly about this, Dr. Jim Holly. The church is a service economy, all just a standalone service economy. And I've experienced that since I was 20. I'm 60 now. So I agree with you, and you really are preaching the word of God.
Thank you. And when you see Jim Holly, say hello to him for me. He used to be my next door neighbor for several years.
Yeah. I hope they get this internet together. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hopefully they'll invite me back when the internet is up.
Yeah.
And
Show the program again or something.
I would like to
All right.
really address the issue of divorce, because it's more foundational, I think, than most people believe, because God set up a family structure, and the man is set up as the head of the family and the wife as his support. When you knock a house off its foundation, it's shaky. And that's what has happened in our families. The mother is a source of the love and affection and the cuddling. Not that fathers can't do that, but fathers bring a strength to the family. You know, when they say, I said, don't do it, kids know that there's some strength coming with that. They figure like they can manipulate mom and get her to do it. But I'm saying this because a concern of mine is our community. And I feel that our community is not as strong as it should be because our families have been weakened. And how do we strengthen the families? And I would like to say, while I'm on this point, I hope somebody is listening out there that the strength in the family is going to come, I feel, in Detroit metro area. We got to strengthen our mothers because the mothers are the ones who can call that son in and, as they say, slap him upside his head and say, son, give me that gun and give me that knife because I do not want to see you dead. I'm going to tell you something. Barack Obama is not going to come down here and straighten out the violence in Detroit. We know Rick Snyder is not going to come down and straighten out the violence in Detroit. Mike Duggan, I think he's trying, but he cannot straighten out the violence in Detroit. We have to straighten out the violence in Detroit. And it starts, I think, with the mothers, with the fathers, and with the families.
Okay, let's take a couple more calls because we are down on time. Caller,
Okay.
you're on the air.
Am I
Hello?
on air yet?
Yes, you're on. Go right ahead.
Hello, how you doing?
Go
Fine,
ahead.
yourself.
Hello.
Good, good. I just want to say this, and this is my feeling. I don't know what nobody else believes, but I believe we have constantly been tricked religiously as well as politically, and they all go hand in hand to keep us separated, dumbed down, confused. If the church was such a pillar of a community, it seems like instead of helping us with this, all these disasters that's going on politically, the way the government is genociding and ostracizing and a number of other things that's being done. It seems to me the church should, and the way they execute and dismantling our school system, the church should be set up like they did in slavery days to help educate. We want to learn how to fish. We want to learn how to be economic
Yes.
advantaged just like everybody else. But we keep getting the bottom of the foot and told that we're going to get our pie in the sky when we die as we watch everybody else rape, snake, and take everything from us. So it's hard for me to believe in the churches anymore. I think it's important for us to know our history, to get back to our true spirituality and stop believing in the myths that some other people have taught us so that they can continue to have the control that they have today. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you for making it here.
I
Call-
think.
what-
Oh, I'm
oh,
sorry.
hold on 1 minute. I'm going to take this last caller. You're the last caller.
And I feel the same way the last caller feel. You know, these churches nowadays, man, it's all about the money. You know, it's not even really about the sermon because I feel like you have so many churches. You know, you can walk upstate fair, and you got about 12 churches in a 6-block rate. Within 6 blocks, you got 12 churches. I mean, to me, it's all about the money. It's like a profit to them, to the preachers or the reverends. I mean, I'm not knocking them all. You have some good ones, but for the most part, I think they should just close the small ones down. And why have 12 churches when you could just have one?
Okay,
You know,
thanks
you
a
got
lot.
all these different members and churches when you could just have one. All the people should just come together. That's you know, that's my opinion. That's how I feel about the churches.
All right, appreciate it, caller. We're down on time, so we got to go. And any closing remarks you like to make?
Well, I would say that the churches, I believe, can certainly do more. I feel that the churches have been pretty silent on this bathroom issue. And though I'm not down on any human beings whatsoever, because God loves everybody and we all have sinned, I think the churches should be talking about whether it's safe to have our children go in bathrooms where everybody can go. I think we do need some degree of separation. I think we have to look past the physical buildings of the church and look to see if there's any spiritual growth going on in the church. A lot of the churches, the buildings are there, but they don't have that many people in there. And certainly we could conserve money, the last caller, if some of the churches would combine together. But I think there's a power struggle issue there over who will lead.
Absolutely. Well, what other advice would you like to give? And give the title of your book again, because we're down on time. We got less than a minute.
The title of the book is Healing for the Brokenhearted. So if you have been hurt by life circumstances, if someone in your family has died and you're having a hard time recovering, I didn't mention rape and incest, but that's an area where people have a very, very difficult time overcoming it. And perhaps someday I can come back and actually get into what the scriptures teaches from a spiritual a position on how to be healed.
All right. Thank you. We appreciate that. This is the fastest hour ever. I'm telling you, it's hot up in here. Carl, would you have anything else to say?
No, not very much. It's just time went by so fast.
I know what you mean, but we didn't want everybody to think we were heathens in here, so we brought a minister in here. I'm your host, Hassan Aleem.
Co-host Carl Williams.
Until next week, peace.